that time again. Welcome back to Right Now. I'm Stephen Kent. Over the weekend, the nation's dads and their kids celebrated or actively avoided Father's Day. I woke up to my kitchen being turned into a Disney Star Wars restaurant, complete with excellent waiting service from my rising fifth grader. Best Eggo waffles I've ever had. I felt appreciated. I also felt momentarily small because in my own father, I've gotten a glimpse of the man that I want to be. And I am still not there yet. He is patient, disciplined, balances joy and deadly seriousness with incredible ease. He's good with money, worldly, but also still reverent. He wasn't always that way. I got to be party to his own growth as a father and a godly man. And it's really made a difference in shaping who I am and still wish to be. But look, 20 million American kids this past week did not have anyone to reflect on or appreciate. 1/4 of our young people don't know their dads or have relationships with them. It's bred all sorts of social ills from drug abuse to criminality, which leads to generational cycles of poverty, illiteracy, crime, and then that cycle goes round and round and round, destroying families and communities altogether. Broken cycles of fatherhood have root causes. Among them is a spiritual and cultural crisis amongst boys and men, which is that they are made to be ashamed of their nature. They're pushed to reject their higher calling to lead and take responsibility, and they're branded as toxic for even a passing embrace of the masculine ideal. Now, what is that ideal? That's on the agenda today. Before we go there, it would be great if you would subscribe to the show on YouTube. We just passed 2,000 subs, so get with it and come along. You can also follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook at RightlyAJ. Tell a friend and don't be shy to leave a comment on YouTube. I do try to respond to all of them, even the mean ones that allege my occasional upspeak is feminine and needs to be rooted from my speech. Maybe one day. My guests today are two people I really admire and who have a unique perspective on manhood and why it matters. He's the host of the Young Heretics podcast, an editor at the American Mind, and chairman of the White Boy Summer Committee on Foreign Relations. Spencer Klavan is joining us from Nashville, Tennessee. You got a very good position on the committee, Spencer. So you should be proud. We've also got here in the house.
Pull a few strings.
Yeah, no, 100%. We've also got here in the house Emma Ayers. She's a political writer and a frequent voice in the American Conservative, USA Today, and the Washington Examiner. Emma, welcome. You promised you were going to wear your veil.
Yeah, well, I left it at home. I'm really sorry to everybody, including your viewers and you and Spencer. Yeah, sorry that I'm a woman that's like showing my hair.
Our entire audience can see you.
Personally, I'm surprised I'm still on this show, actually.
No, here we are. We're all here together. Guys, I wanted to start with a little bit of Father's Day reflection because we got a lot to talk about. Important, weighty, existential issues that matter a lot to the survival of the Republic and mankind. But I just wanted to ask you first, just Father's Day, it's been on my mind all week. Tell me a little bit about your dads. Whichever one of you wants to go first, maybe Emma, since she's here. Would love to know a little bit more about where you come from and where you get some of the beliefs you hold.
Sure. Yeah, so my dad is really cool. It's funny because whenever I describe him, I always list off all the things that I think are really great about men, which is big, burly, hairy. No, I'm joking. He is big and burly though. Yeah, no, he's, I think he is similar in essence to kind of the old world, like classic Western,
John Wayne.
Honestly, he kind of looks like him, I think. He's incredibly good with his hands. He can like make anything he wants. He built my mom this like gorgeous farmhouse table the other day. He's just incredibly capable. I would say he's got a really good, goofy sense of humor while also scaring any other man that's around him. So he's able to like really walk that line, very well, just by virtue of the fact that he is, I don't know, he's just so strong and determined. He's from South Dakota. So he
that will do it.
That really will, which is exactly what happened.
I'll do it. Yeah. Spencer, I'm familiar with your dad. not the late great Andrew Klavan. He's still with us, but he's
do you know something I don't?
I'm sorry to report, but your father. Yes, we're not going to go there.
Now this.
Your dad's an interesting guy. Could you tell us a little bit about your relationship?
Yeah, well, it is funny. I mean, when you asked that question, I was like, it's always kind of weird to me talking about my dad in public because since I've been an adult, he's become sort of a conservative celebrity, whatever you want to call it. People watch his show, which was not always true growing up. He was sort of a reclusive novelist when I was a kid. And this like new generation of people that know about him and I think he sort of is America's dad on his show a little bit. And it's always difficult to convey to people that that he does walk the walk in his personal life. This is something, maybe we'll get into this actually, the distinction between what you project out there, what you construct, what you put into your podcast or whatever, and how you actually live. My dad has what I think is one of the most important manly characteristics, and that's integrity on that score, the kind of union between the outward projection and who you are when nobody's looking or when you're just with your family. I did think when you were talking about that sort of walking the line between serious and funny.
Yeah.
My dad's almost constitutionally incapable of taking basically anything seriously. And that used to drive me insane growing up. I would say to him, like, I'm trying to tell you something serious. And he would make some joke, but eventually I learned, and this is something I hope that he's passed on to me, that the reason for that was that he took certain things extremely seriously. That is, he took his responsibility as breadwinner extremely seriously. Once he became a Christian, he took his relationship to God with the utmost seriousness. And even before then, he took his integrity, his intellectual integrity, very seriously. And so he sort of passed on to me the idea, I think, that if you do feel secure in those things, and if you're devoting yourself to that level of seriousness and uncompromising discipline in those areas, you don't really have to take the powerful men of the world very seriously. You don't have to take the world itself, which is so broken and comically fallen, very seriously. And so when people laugh at my dad's monologues, I always think, yeah, that's kind of that's him, because in real life he walks the walk.
Yeah, everybody now gets to hear what you've been hearing for so long. I imagine there's a little whiff of refreshment about that. You to see other people sort of engaging with the guy who your dad has long been. Is there been things about your parents that you have had to grow to appreciate with your own journeys and maturity? Because I imagine we all there are areas where we resent our fathers in particular when we're younger, and then we don't see until we're significantly older that that is the thing about them that is strength, and it just drove me crazy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, I was thinking about this the other day because, as I've gotten older, as one does, I think I've just gotten more and more conservative, and my idealism about what traditionalism looks like in parenting has just so shifted, in the sense that when, my dad would, want to make sure that I was home by a certain time or wasn't dating a particular kind of person, I was like, man, he's just so controlling. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, man, he should have done that even more. There's an element where, his, I think, just traditional masculinity, and which is incidentally what we're going to be talking about, has become something that I just so appreciate and so look for in other men.
And I think one of the operating definitions, and there are many definitions of what the masculine ideal is, what masculinity is, but one thing that you just described there is not being a doormat. Yeah. Having an opinion and something to say. Yeah. And, you can't just bring anybody home. There's a standard.
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
And being able to tolerate being disliked too, I think, for that moment, right? I mean, I've thought a lot about that patience that it takes to actually, get yelled at by your teenage daughter, or have your son throw a tantrum because you're being the mean guy. And they say, kids, I think, know how to say terrible things to their parents that probably wound them more than we know. Mm-hmm. And so in order to be able to put your foot down in the face of that, I think you have to have a certain degree of inner strength and confidence that you're on the right track.
Emma, could you take us down the road of the premise for the conversation today, which is masculinity is in crisis? You hear about it everywhere. We hear often, and it's very popular in the podcasting and YouTubing world, that like boys are sort of rudderless. Young men don't know how to be men. And the only thing that they are being told is that the masculine ideal is toxic, is destructive, and that the only thing worth preserving is the feminine one. Could you sort of sell the audience, if they are not on board, that this is a problem, that it is?
Sure. Well, I'm coming at it from a conservative point of view. And also, to be clear to everybody that is watching, I'm a Catholic. So,
a convert, though, right?
I am a convert.
Yeah.
I am a convert.
Recently.
As of a year. Yeah. So we definitely could say recent. Yeah, I think for anybody that is being intellectually honest, you can look at, the way that society is going. I was going to say progressing. I wouldn't go that far. But the way society is going. And certainly there is an element where the masculine is being stripped and the feminine is being crystallized in the sense that what is good and what is bad. The fact that the phrase toxic masculinity has been thrown around so much that we can actually joke about it now is crazy to me. I mean, it's just a part of our lexicon. And it can mean literally anything. Anything that boys are naturally prone to, can be described as toxic. If we're talking about what is natural, you can't just say this thing that you are naturally prone to is toxic and expect boys to grow up in a good, healthy,
Yeah, even the
society.
American Psychological Association has like weighed in on this and given definitions in their own guidelines about what masculinity is. And in some of their documents, they describe traditional masculinity, and they pretty much just ascribe it to what is often referred to online as toxic masculinity, which, can be like anti-femininity, an interest in adventure, risk, and sometimes a predisposition to violence. These are things that are just kind of different between boys and girls a lot of the time. Spencer, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but even the highest levels of our elites and associations and medical industries are getting involved in this discussion in a way that's incredibly weird.
Really bizarre.
Yeah, I think it's really intriguing that the word the APA uses to sort of almost interchangeably with toxic masculinity is traditional masculinity. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me like that's distantly informed by this sort of gender theory, Judith Butler idea that gender itself, right, is a social construct or performance. And if that's the case, if you have this sort of Rousseauian idea that all society is just an imposition on the natural man, then like all of the terrible excesses that masculinity is prone to in this view, right, come from this set of traditions. And to me, what's terrible about that is that there isn't a traditional element of masculinity. That is, there is an element of manly virtue that's passed down from generation to generation. I mean, this isn't unique to men. I think this is true of women.
Can you
too.
ascribe some of what those virtues are in your mind? We talked about integrity. What are some of the other pillars of that, so that we sort of have an operating shared idea of what that is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think courage has almost always been, and we were talking about this when we were talking about our dads, right? And courage in the sense of, the sort of traditional charging into battle kind of courage, but also just courage in a sense of rootedness, right? I mean, the Greek word for courage is andreia, literally manliness. And I think that there is a certain sense without courage, you can't sort of express any of those other manly virtues in a meaningful way. You can't hold your ground with your traditional values. You can't, you can't lead your family, for example, into a slightly risky area. That risk taking. So I would say courage and integrity are two good ones. I don't know. I'd like to hear what Emma would name as well.
Yeah, I think, courage and integrity, that's true. And I put in my latest piece for TAC. I think there's an element where, there isn't, you want to hold on to tradition, and understanding the past, understanding what is duty. Because I think that those two things are, they can't be mutually exclusive. You have to understand the past in order to understand your duty. And that to me is something that's really important for masculinity. Understanding what you're supposed to do and then doing it, as opposed to this sort of like ambiguous nature that I think is being thrust upon men right now, where it's, they're trying to cater to all the changing whims of society, as opposed to understanding who they are, what they do, and then doing it. to me, I think that is what we kind of see, this discrepancy between older men and younger men very clearly. And I think that's what's being deemed as toxic, is just this, older people understanding this is how we're supposed to do things, and the younger people trying to figure out all the different waves of, society that's
I think one of the... Go ahead, Spencer.
Well, it's interesting again that, I think you're absolutely right about duty. And it's interesting then that another word that you hear tossed around a lot by the toxic masculinity crowd is expectations, right? Society's expectations are thought to be the place where everything goes terribly wrong, right? This is like this horrible imposition. And I think a word that I use a lot when I'm talking to young men about these issues, I mean, I get a lot of messages from young men who are, really confused about all of this stuff, to be frank, because of this messaging, right? And one of the words that I use a lot is aspiration. Right. You don't have to be born with a certain characteristic in order to be born naturally aspiring toward it. And when the natural aspirations of a boy meet the expectations or the duties of a healthy society, then I think you get this kind of growth that is part of what's being interfered with here.
I don't know if this is on the same track, but aspiration seems to me to be linked to desire, to want, to drive for certain things. And Emma, you've been bemoaning for many years the state of the dating scene in the post MeToo world. Is just like men are not license is not the right word, but encouraged to express desire for people and have to wait for everything to come their way, whether it is, casual flirtation at bars, whether it is eye contact, whether it's speaking to somebody in an elevator who you would actually like to maybe go out and get a drink with. Like this sort of idea that you can't have goals, aspiration, want, that you just have to wait for everything to just come your way. That has consequences. Like, I'm not saying that it's just like an awful, awful thing, but it has consequences that we don't talk about.
I'll go ahead and say it's an awful, awful thing. I'll put that out there. No, I think, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's an element where what they want for men is completely different from what they want from women. And I say we all know what I'm talking about. Society seems to want women to be able to take that sort of gumption that we normally expected with men, and it's totally been swapped.
Courage.
Right? Courage.
A little bit of that courage. Element.
Exactly. Women are encouraged to be a girl boss and get what you want. Go girl, you want a career, go get it. You want a guy, ask him out. And it's totally opposite for men. And that is something that is that sort of idealism has just accelerated so quickly in the past, 10 years. To the point where, I think a lot of women and men are just not sure of their footing for reasons like you said, I do bemoan the dating scene. Not that I don't date, I date plenty, but, I understand that as a woman who grew up thinking, oh, this is how men are supposed to act. Men are supposed to pursue women. Men are supposed to have these sort of traditional understandings of what a date looks like. And then for that to be switched so quickly, I think everybody is unsure of what's going on. And I would say those consequences are awful.
I think that's what's confusing here is because the feminine is not upheld for women. The feminine is only upheld for men. The masculine is upheld for women. And then so you either have sort of this just like gender swap thing going on, or the gender neutrality ideology, which is its own thing.
Exactly. Yep. I'm curious what Spencer
I wonder
thinks.
Actually. Well, right. I wonder about this a lot. Right. That it seems to me that behind a lot of the toxic masculinity rhetoric is actually there is discomfort with or horror at the assertive male impulse in that. And I think, some of these excesses that came out of the MeToo movements are good examples of this, right? That now suddenly men don't even know what to do about their sexuality, don't know what to do about taking initiative with women in the dating world as you're describing. But it seems almost like there's a deeper aversion underlying this, which is a horror at femininity, a horror at homemaking, a horror at virtues like modesty, being demure. I mean, these sorts of things which were kind of thought to be associated very closely with women's power in most traditional societies, the power that women have over men to invite them into that aspiration, to encourage masculinity in them, as in fact, Emma, you are well known for doing, right? I mean, those sorts of things seem to me to be what are truly devalued. It's truly devalued to be a feminine woman. And then therefore women must be more like men, and then men must wither and shrink to make room for women to do that, because if they didn't, then naturally that, women wouldn't be competing with men in the masculine sphere in the same way that they are. I'm not sure. I guess all I'm saying is it seems to me that these two things are very intimately related, and I'm not sure that the horror of the feminine isn't the first part of it, the kind of bedrock of it.
Yeah, Spencer, I think you're totally correct. What I would say though is that there is a sort of bizarre celebration of, we see this now with, who is it? Harry Styles running around wearing dresses.
Harry Styles versus Candace Owens 2021. Yeah.
Super bizarre. You look at these things. I want to say I agree that it's horror, but it's almost just an intentional distortion. That's the word. Wow, couldn't think of that. Distortion of femininity, because you look at these people on the red carpet who are wearing dresses, clearly trying to make some sort of huge statement. They look bad. They look bad. I don't even think anybody would look at that and say, wow, they look really good. It's almost like, the only people who are saying that are people who are writing articles about it. But we all know these men that are putting on dresses look bizarre. And it's this weird confrontation between, this idealism and the public that I think we are seeing very clearly. We are naturally not inclined toward this, but they're forcing this upon us. And yeah, you're talking about, horror of femininity. It is horrible to look at. It's horrifying to me. Maybe, I don't know. I think it probably is horrifying to a lot of people.
We're talking about Harry Styles. Billie Eilish, she finally has stepped out into showing skin herself as someone who has finally come of age. She's no longer wearing the baggy t-shirts and baggy pants down to her feet, and actually expressing womanhood. And her fans have lashed against it. They've been you've been promoting this other idea, this modesty idea, this weird Gen Z, transgressive modesty idea for all this time. And she's leaned back in the other direction. I don't know if it's just to promote a new album or what, but there are these weird swings, particularly in pop culture, where people are going in both directions.
Yeah. No. And I think to that extent, it's just trying to abolish the natural, trying to abolish the good. Because, people who look at that, which is most people, look at Harry Styles and say, wow, he looks really bad, are deemed to be, incredibly problematic, right? When I think we can all just agree, he looks bad and that he shouldn't be wearing a dress, right? It's weird.
Well, no, the ugliness of it is an important argument in favor of nature, right? And I often encounter this also because a whole sort of next step of all of this is the gender neutral or the non-binary or the gender fluid, whatever, that you would deconstruct these barriers entirely. And part of the best evidence for me that's not actually a real thing is that the only way to actually pursue that idea that you're going to break out of gender molds is to sort of sand down everything into this big featureless blob, right? And you get these articles why I'm a non-binary icon. Why won't anybody sleep with me, right? And it's sort of well, because you look awful, and there is and there is a good argument there for that when you're sort of grinding against the natural elements of your selfhood, you're gonna end up sort of unsexy. I don't know. It's so. As you say, Emma, it's almost taboo to be talking about. And yet it's a crucial thing to be observing in the world, right? It's the crime of noticing things that you would say, actually, this seems really unappealing and unattractive.
One thing I want to posit here, because this discussion is oldest time, centuries old, probably thousands of years old, that manhood is up for grabs, that it's in decline. This is not new. And Spencer, I listened to your podcast, Young Heretics, and you've talked about cross-dressing and sort of the ancient world and how that plays into theater and where sort of playing with gender roles, particularly in an artistic sense and the thespian sense, I don't know if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there is something to be done with that, but it kind of matters what the boundaries of where that kind of stuff happens are. Because when I see Harry Styles like put on a dress to like, I don't know, get clapter or be on the front of a magazine, it doesn't bother me or say anything to me about who this person is or values. I guess I just grew up on like listening to too much David Bowie. Like that's just how I view art and thespians as being. So it doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
Am I twisting your view of that a little bit? Because I feel like this is just nothing new.
No, you're not twisting my view. I mean, I think one point that I try to hammer home a lot on the show is that this idea that, I mean, toxic masculinity itself, but more generally, this idea that gender roles are pernicious and evil and oppressive is almost always based on the most extravagant sexist caricature of what it means to be a man and a woman, right? Like toxic masculinity is itself not a description of a virtuous man. It's a description of a boor, right? It's a description of somebody whose, sort of boyish impulses have never been tamed by the great civilizational diktats of things like chivalry, right? And so we set up these caricatures of manhood and womanhood and what's expected of men and women in traditional societies. And then we say, well, isn't that terrible? So we must abolish it all. But one of the things that comes out if you actually look at, for example, ancient Athenian society in the 5th century BC, which is where I think I took some of those cross-dressing examples. I was particularly talking about Euripides, right, and Bacchae. But there's an enormous awareness that these binary realities of our humanity are not like completely impermeable, and that men have something to learn from women have something to learn from men. I mean, this is the great tradition of all of this stuff. And when I read Emma's piece about Twitter and manliness, the first thing that came to my mind was Plutarch's sayings of the Spartan women. Plutarch, the essayist, records all of these things that Spartan women used to say to their kids. Very gruff and assertive, not at all what you would think of as kind of this caricature, this, I think, feminist caricature of the traditional homemaker. Things like, Spartan women can assert themselves to men because they're the only women who give birth to real men, and come back, go into battle and come back carried on your shield or holding it. That is, don't surrender, die rather than surrender. And, Clytemnestra, not a great role model, but is called man-minded in Aeschylus. These sort of, the notion that these transgressions exist was never thought to be an argument against the existence or the value of the categories. And to me, it's kind of just a stupid argument to say like, oh, look, there's this fuzziness around the edges. There are certain edge cases, and therefore all of this needs to be torn down. That just seems like a failure in logic, and also deeply ahistorical. I want
to ask about the resistance to what we're talking about here, sort of the gender neutrality thing, and all of the different movements that have popped up, particularly online, in the academy, social media kind of stuff, against it. I think top of mind is Jordan Peterson. Like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life is often held up as sort of like the prime example of like, boys are rudderless. They're looking for somebody to flock to and hear about how to be men. Like one thing that Jordan Peterson, I believe this is he who says this, and I think it relates to what you were laying out, Spencer, is like, he said, a good man is a dangerous man who has it under control, which is actually a line I really like. But he represents this secular sort of clapback against gender neutrality, whereas there is also a deeply spiritual one. And I think Emma is probably somebody who sees tension between those two things and which one is going to actually lead to good outcomes. Yeah,
no, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I'm very torn on Jordan Peterson, mainly because I see that he has done good. He's done a lot of good. There's so many men that seem to be trying to get it together, and they'll cite Jordan Peterson as the reason why. That's great. I'm really happy for them in that sense. My worry, like you said, is that and I wrote this in my piece, and I think this is one of the fundamental issues with our society right now, but so much of kind of how we live our lives is live action role playing. And religion, to me, as a Catholic, is something that gives life its utter essence. So when that is stripped from, masculinity, or just like, even just living day to day, there's an element where the meaning of it, in my view, is stripped as well. And it also, I think, kind of hampers its longevity, because you have to really believe in something in order to, I guess, perpetuate it. So when we're talking about masculinity, there is an element where fear of God is crucial, in my opinion. And I agree that like getting up and making your bed every day and like, asking women out is really important. But I mean, how sustainable, how meaningful is it until you're doing it for a reason that is greater than yourself?
Yeah, God gives you duty and direction
Exactly.
and a sense of service to others. Right. The secular tradition of this sort of, get your stuff together, clean your room,
right.
stand up straight. That gives you, I don't know, like it just gives you rules on how to get through the day. Like that's very different than how to set the trajectory of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have both a thought about that, but also a question, Emma, for you, because I am divided about Peterson in the exact same way. Mm-hmm. My thought about the God thing, in addition to what you guys are saying, is all of this stuff about, men need to show their weaker side. They need to be vulnerable. They need to cry in public. They need to do all of these things, right? I have often wondered whether that's not a replacement for how men used to regard their relationship with God. I mean, scriptural kings and male prophets and male leaders, it seems to me, are shown in profoundly weak, intimate, vulnerable relationships with God because he is so much higher, stronger, and more powerful. And in light of him, they understand their brokenness, their humanity, their smallness, and all of these things. And it's in the context of that they're able to then shelve that and go out into society and do what they need to do and project strength and confidence. It seems to me as if losing that, kind of go into the closet, the room, and like prostrate yourself before God and show him your weakness, is leading to this psychological need, right? To put your weakness like out there in the world before everybody, because you need somebody to witness to it, somebody to see it. My question about Peterson is this. I think it's C.S. Lewis says that the poetry of Wordsworth was for him a guidance for the man coming up from below. That is, he had no spirituality at all. And then he read Wordsworth, who has this kind of naturalist, almost pantheist, although not quite, spirituality in some of his earlier work, right? And that was a step for him on the road back to his faith. Mm-hmm. In your experience, in your view, are people treating Peterson that way? That is, are they taking the Peterson gospel on board and then like advancing past it to the actual gospel? Or are they just kind of staying in this secular like roadhouse where they never have to leave?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So it's funny because from what I can tell, and I listen to Jonathan Peugeot. I don't know if you all have heard of this person, but he's amazing. He's a YouTube commentator who is also an Orthodox icon carver. So of course I watch him. But he's friends with Peterson, and he talks sometimes about their relationship. Not a lot. He doesn't want to, divulge everything, but he is candid about the fact that Peterson is on the road to Christianity himself. And Peterson has said that a few times. So, I guess what I'm saying, Spencer, is that I would be curious to see Peterson, if Peterson is making his way there, would that happen with the people who are adherents of his ideology? I'm going to argue probably that it's not going to normally be the case. And the reason for that is kind of the reason that I wrote the piece. I think that... Well,
let's actually qualify the piece real quick, because I've been meaning to introduce it to people.
Yeah,
so one of the things that I want to talk about now is how to push back on all of these forces the right way.
Sure.
And you wrote an article, which I really enjoyed. People send me ideas for episodes all the time. And this episode is a result of you sending me Why Twitter is Not Manly by Emma Ayers in The American Conservative. And this piece, I think, really nicely lays out the problem that we've discussed here. And then there is this, highly online class, Gen Z, millennial people who believe in restoring the ancient and conservative virtues of manliness and masculinity, but all they do is tweet about it. And so
Yeah.
Now that we've sort of introduced it,
there it is.
Take it away.
Well, yeah, that's great. That was where I was going. So this is a great segue. What I was about to say about Peterson is that it kind of, I think, allows for a society that is already very satisfied with living a half life to continue doing so and still satiating those needs to be, structured, routine, whatever, like having masculinity without any of the sort of deeper, richer meaning. And so, yes, I wrote the piece because something that I am really concerned about as a conservative is that I think that conservatives are, our ideology is what our society needs, but I'm worried that we are not utilizing praxis.
You're right. It is also fundamentally unmanly, referencing Twitter. If masculinity is earned by real courage, unyielding principle in the face of unprincipled adversity, and conscious care for what matters, then the idea that you prove your manhood with Twitter dunks, consistent likes, and a follower count north of 3,000 is as ridiculous of a notion that you should train for the Wimbledon Cup by playing Wii tennis. This speaks to the LARPing thing. Yeah. I mean, some of the best and most well-known advocates for the masculine ideal, they don't do the things that you want them to be doing, which is starting families.
Sure.
And therein lies the tension. With our guest last week, Saurabh Sharma, was talking about, these Gen Zers who are all trying to take us back to some sort of old idea of the good, but none of them have wives. And I do hold that as important to note that why are you not dating? Why are you not having children and working and working and working? These things matter.
Yep. Yeah. I think there's an element where, to me, our time on this earth is just so limited. And I think we're inclined toward just kind of wasting it, thinking that we're living a particular kind of life because we're saying things as opposed to actually doing them. Right. This is why Hannah Arendt was such a game changer, because she was so intent on saying, look, we can talk about these kind of things all day, but until we actually do something about it, it's not real. But what we've done as a society is just allowed ourselves to just talk and have ideas that we put on the internet and utilizing none of them. And that is, I think, poisonous if we want to actually affect change. And I know, as a conservative who interacts with a lot of conservatives, that's the point, and that's what we want to do. I don't know if Spencer has thoughts on that.
Yeah, I am. I'm chewing on this because I think the critique that you make of the very online right in that piece is absolutely touches a nerve, right? You are absolutely identifying a reality, which is people who use, I think Joshua Mitchell would call this, they use their online persona as a substitute for their real persona and their real life, as opposed to a supplement, right? As opposed to some, element of it that they can incorporate and use. I also think that there is a reason for that, which has to do, and this speaks to both the Twitter thing and the Peterson thing. And it has to do with what we were talking about earlier about tradition, right? We had in this country, in the West more generally, a number of institutions, the family being foremost among them. But Boy Scouts being another one, and sports teams and all of these things, within which these ideas of masculinity and manly virtue and aspirational manhood, all these things were passed down from men to boys. One of the things that has now been just systematically, to use a buzzword, right, systematically dismantled is that idea that you would have these institutions that people, and one of the things that I see, as they say, in the DMs, not to be very online, but right, among the people that are reaching out to me privately, right, is that this is the place, or Jordan Peterson is the one place that they even know to go to get that instruction. And that's it seems to me that's worse. It seems to me it's worse than to get your instruction of that kind from a YouTube video and from a DM group than it is to get it from your father, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also better than nothing. And I think that puts us in this tricky and difficult position because it's very, very easy to get to that place and, as we've been saying, never go any further, right? There are also ways, though, to push back against it, right? there's a difference, of course, between a media personality and a person listening to a media personality. There's a difference between Jordan Peterson and Jordan Peterson's audience. And I wonder whether people who do make a living talking about this stuff, and there are always going to be those people, could do a better job of actually enforcing or at least inviting accountability about this stuff. So if you're going to be like, it's a weird version of this that's like kind of goofy to talk about, but just right-wing bodybuilder Twitter, right? Where everybody's always lifting weights, talking about getting back in shape, right?
Isn't that what you're part of, Spencer?
Well, I don't know if I count exactly because I'm like, not quite trad enough and I'm not anonymous, but like, yeah, but I'm only invoking it to make a point, which is like, there's a trope on right-wing bodybuilding on Twitter, which is in the replies, which is post-physique. Right. And post physique means like, you're talking about all the workouts that you're doing, like show us even just a video of doing those workouts. Right. Mm-hmm. And so at a deeper level, right, there should be a version of post physique for like post family, right? Post like dating experience it seems to me, and Emma, you allude to this, that we're probably not going to just cede the online space entirely as conservatives, but that we could do a better job talking about accountability in our online personas. I don't know if you agree with this or if I'm still too online.
Well, I think the post physique thing was like men talking about lifting weights, and then also like this other version of sort of masculinity, which is go out and date, right? Like think about like the Will Smith movie Hitch, right? Like these kind of like how to go and approach girls and actually get people to go on dates with you. Like those are two elements of the puzzle, but left alone, they equal nothing. And in fact, they just are a total dead end road for your soul and for society. It has to be channeled into, I am going to be strong physically for a reason, to protect people and to offer guidance and direction. And I'm going to learn how to approach women so I can have children that kind of thing. And then I'm going to parent them and I'm going to make the world a better place. Sure. But we don't have that part. There is no funnel where it is actually then turning into action. By and large, I think family formation is sort of in a rut.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's an element to all of this that I think comes back to perhaps too much focus on the self as opposed to extraneous focus. So I listened to a really interesting podcast, a Catholic podcast, where a psychologist was kind of talking about the loss of identity in society and how identity used to be a thing that one had within oneself. And then once your identity became a thing that you put online, it's almost like you empty yourself. It was something that you could see. You had to verify your own self through looking at yourself online as opposed to knowing who you are
your brand.
Deeply. Your brand.
Your personal brand.
It makes me want to cry that we use that. But yeah, your brand. Your brand. I'm going to be sad today. Truly, your brand. It's something that in order to verify that you are a person, you have to have an online presence that you have crafted for yourself as opposed to knowing yourself deeply inside. And I would argue that, masculinity, as we talked about, is kind of, knowing who you are. And so once that's kind of stripped from you and just put online, and we could talk about like physique Twitter, right? Like, why are you working out? Are you working out so you can take a picture of yourself and put it on Twitter? Are you working out so that you can, like Steve was saying, like have a family and be there for them and be able to pick up your kids, right? The motivation, I think, actually really matters because that's what you're thinking about when you're doing the thing. And when your mind is elsewhere while you're doing it, you're not going to be fully present. And that, I think, strips the essence and meaning out of life. Now I'm just going off on social media as opposed to.
But you already did that totally in the American conservative.
I did do that. I did say that. Sorry, Spencer, what were you saying?
Yeah, no, I think it's quite valid. I mean, to use like an atrocious phrase, it seems to me that what we're now talking around is like a teleology of digital engagement, and whether there's such a thing as digital engagement that fits usefully into a teleology of actual human embodied life, right? And I imagine that all of us would agree, right, that the teleology of your life, the actual what's the purpose of you being on Earth, is not only more important than digital engagement, than social media, but like the only, like, on a completely different sphere of importance, like matters utterly. And I guess one thing that vexes me is whether there is a supplemental role for things like social media and digital technology in that rooted human teleological life, right? I mean, it seems to me as if, given the state of the world that we are in, which does have a really sort of low degree of local tradition, local engagement, or at least is very hostile to those sorts of things. There's, for some people at least, there's a role on the way to forming an actual, human virtuous family life. There's a role for digital tech in that. But all of that having been said, right? I mean, the challenges of it, the temptations of it that you identify are completely real. I don't disagree with any of them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess, and I'm curious to hear from you, who is much more online than I am. How much do you think that men are going to be able to hedge that? There is an element where I think online men, and this is not directed toward you, Spencer, definitely you are very different toward this. But online men, I mean, men are, egoists at the end of the day. And there's definitely really good things about that. I'm not saying men should not have egos. I think they should. But Twitter and Facebook and all these other social media platforms has provided definitely a avenue for men to be incredibly self-indulgent in that egoism, in ways that I don't think anything else can, because it's fundamentally unreal. And the real ways that they can do that are more difficult and not as effective. So it has that addictive quality for sure that I think is, that naturally men are going to be inclined toward. And I'm in favor of the natural man. So what I'm asking is, how much can we just allow, or I shouldn't say allow, there's nothing we can do about it, but how much should men allow themselves to indulge in it with the idea of moderation? Like, is moderation even something that you think naturally men can be inclined toward in this instance?
Wow. Yeah. Great question. I think you mentioned in your piece the sort of media theorist Marshall McLuhan, and rightly, right, that medium is, he says the medium is the message, right? There's just something about the form of engagement that shapes you, even just no matter what you're saying, whether you're saying you should lift weights, whether you're saying you should start a family, whether you're saying you should like riot and burn down American cities, right? We're all being shaped by this digital environment in which we live. And I think one of the most pernicious or dangerous parts of the social medium, not necessarily digital technology full stop, but social media, is that it dissolves this barrier which exists in other media between, somebody whose job it is to be like constructing and saying things, products for people to read and think about, and somebody who's to, go away and take that and think about it and maybe incorporate it into his life, right? I mean, social media makes us all into both performers and consumers. And that does seem to me to be a problem, because one of the interesting things about artists and public figures and people who go on podcasts, all of this, right, is that it is an actual, it's sort of it's certainly been maligned throughout history as an effeminate thing to do. But the nicer way of saying that is that it is a thing that is suited particularly to a certain kind of person, who is in touch with certain virtues which are feminine, right? Who are in touch with feminine virtues like introspection, right? And sort of, self-awareness, all these things. And the temptations of that are well known. Egoism is one of them. And so I definitely think that we could do a better job asking ourselves, like, why we're using these technologies at all. I mean, I don't think that somebody like Jordan Peterson should log off entirely. Like, I think that would be a bad thing for the world. But I think it's possible that many of the people who listen to Jordan Peterson would be happier and more fulfilled, and
they need to log off
and
at some
live
point.
natural lives, logging off more. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I picked up, just from being on social media, like I picked up Spencer's show, Young Heretics. I started reading the classics because I listened to that show. It interested me in bigger and older and more timeless ideas. And those things have value, but it does not have value unless you live it.
Exactly.
And there's something about a Christian is supposed to go out there and minister to the world and actually tell people about Christ and about being saved. But the social media example doesn't quite line up because you don't just go to social media and tell people. You are taking the poison. It's like going out to preach to the drug addicts, but you have to take the heroin in order to actually spend time with them. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, you are constantly in a slow state of dying on these platforms, unless at some point I think you can view an off ramp. I want to give you a final word, Emma, just to kind of bring us to a close here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that to me, whenever I'm thinking about social media, and obviously this doesn't just go for men. I think social media in general is just a bad thing for people to spend their time with, because there's so many beautiful, very real things to spend your time with. And yeah, I think that's what we need to be inclined toward, is how are we spending our time? Why are we doing it? What are our motivations? That's not just a masculine thing. That's an everybody thing. And at the end of the day, if your motivation is to, better yourself, then I think we'll find that it's going to be almost entirely off the internet.
Spencer Klavan, Emma Ayers, thank you both so much. This is a tough and important subject, and I appreciate your input on it.
Yeah.
All right, and every week we do like to wrap things up with a bit of good news, both from the headlines or from our personal lives, so that we can end on a good note. Emma, you got anything happy, positive on your mind? Because I know it's all doom and gloom up there sometimes.
Right. I took a break from being really sad all the time, and I did a cool thing. I moved to Utah. In the past couple months, I've been living in Salt Lake City. Gorgeous place. I was living in DC prior to that, so yeah, they're basically the same. No, not really at all. Yeah, it's been an amazing time. It is a traditionalist conservative's paradise, some would say. So yeah, loving Salt Lake, and would encourage everybody to visit.
Good for you. It's important to get out there into the world, and good for you for going out west. I am jealous, and I hope to follow you here in the next couple of years.
You're better, Stephen.
I'll go ahead and go real quick. So one thing that I am happy about, particularly in light of today's conversation, is that according to the Institute for Family Studies, the proportion of children being raised in two-parent family homes, married mother and father, is on the rise after a decline that began in the latter half of the 20th century. Kind of census figures are showing that the proportion of children living with two parents topped 70% in 2020, and that is off a low of 67% in 2005. So these are really modest increases. We're just talking about 3-4 percentage points, but those are hundreds, thousands of kids who are growing up with their parents together in the home, and that is good news. The decline from 1960 is so steep. It is just like a hill you can ski down, but it has flattened. So you have to wonder if in the long arc of time, if this will go back up. And I think that we might be headed in a positive direction for at least a couple of decades on that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, I'm not totally sure whether this is going to be controversial good news or not for this
controversy.
Podcast and this
Spencer
audience,
Klavan, never,
never. That's no, I'm allergic to it, as you know. No, I am very heartened by the admittedly sort of multivocal and multi-part national effort to push back against what has come to be called critical race theory in schools. And the reason I say it might be controversial is because, there are different views on exactly how you should get this poisonous stuff out of kids' ears. For those who don't know, critical race theory has become a catch-all term for an incredibly aggressive strain of thought that sort of identifies all things bad with whiteness and then teaches this to very young, impressionable children with predictably disastrous results. the reason that I raise it as good news here is not because I want to like have an argument about exactly how to push back against this, but because it seems genuinely as if this is an issue in which the right is pursuing an effective strategy that involves engaging on the ground. It seems like when parents hear about this stuff, and you can see videos coming out of school boards and things like that, when they understand what's really being taught as opposed to the current sort of like leftist obfuscation about it, they genuinely find it abhorrent. And that speaks well of the beleaguered American soul to me. There's a great piece, The Battle for Loudoun County, written by my friend and colleague Nate Hochman on the American Mind, that sort of deals with this in one locality. But I'm heartened by the fact that you can still go into school districts and sound the alarm about something like CRT and get a response.
The pushback is real, and it has been amazing to see. I think the grassroots note that you make is absolutely true. And we actually interviewed Nathaniel Hochman here on Rightly just a couple of days ago. So if you go into our YouTube channel, you can actually find Nate near the top of the feed talking about the Battle of Loudoun County, those parents against critical race theory. That is it for this week's episode of Right Now with Stephen Kent. I'm Stephen Kent. We will be back next week. New shows every Thursdays and videos throughout the week. We'll see you then.